Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I'm your host, Benedict. If you are new to the show, welcome. This is where we help you make exciting sounding records from your home studio. You're in the right place if you're looking to do that. If you're already a listener, thanks so much for coming back. We always appreciate you. Today is, as you see, a solo episode. I'm not here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm owen-flood. And if you are a long-time listener, then you've probably noticed that we took a break, and a pretty long one. And it was the first break ever since we started this podcast. We always had one episode a week for like 4 years or so without a break. Now we took the first break ever, and as soon as Mal comes back, we're going to talk about why that was. There was multiple reasons for that. Just know that everything's fine. We are doing well, and we've been working on amazing stuff during that break. And I've been mixing tons of records. We've been onboarding a lot of coaching students. We've improved the programs. We've created new content. I've hired for my studio and the coaching business, and like a lot of stuff happened. We're going to talk about those things. There were also not so cool things happening. I was struggling with health issues. There was like personal stuff going on, and all of that led to us having to take a break. But we are back, and we'll be back better than ever. I can promise you that. There's exciting things that we are working on right now. And yeah, so more of that on the next couple of episodes. Speaking about the coaching that we offer, if you are not already a part of the Self-Recording Syndicate, our coaching program, please go to theselfrecordingband.com, scroll down the page, look at what this is all about. It's all laid out there for you so you know what this is about and how it works. And if that sounds interesting to you, please apply for that program. And if we accept the application, you're going to get an email from us, and then we're going to jump on a free clarity call with you to figure out a great solution to help you achieve your goals in music and audio. And that might be the coaching program, that might be something else, whatever helps you achieve your goals. We always do a personal call to figure that out and to see if we are a good fit. We only accept like 20% of the applications at the moment because it needs to be a fit for both of us. So don't be afraid. I'm not going to try and sell you something you don't need. And but I'd love for you to do that because I know that so many people in our audience, and I see that from the emails we get, from the messages, the interaction with our audience. I know that so many of you could really benefit from this, and I haven't talked to all of you yet. So please go there and apply for our personal help, for our guidance, for our coaching. This is not an online course. This is personal mentoring. This is accountability, feedback, guidance, access to me and the team whenever you need it. This is also a group, a community of like-minded, passionate musicians and engineers from all over the world. This means also access to all of our courses, content, and playbooks that we have. This is not the main thing, though, as I said, but we use this material to train you, of course, and to fill in any knowledge gaps that you might have. But the main thing is we are your recording buddies. I'm your personal recording buddy if you join that syndicate, and you can ask me anything, anytime if you're in there, and I will make sure that your recordings and mixes sound better than ever, and that you can be super proud of them and put them out in the world. So go to theselfrecordingband.com and apply for coaching. We've changed the program quite a bit. We've made it way more, we've made it way better. We've made it more, we get better results for our clients. We always got them results, but it's getting better and better every single month, actually. And we have a bigger community in there. We've created new playbooks. The way we handle everything has changed because we've learned a lot during the last 3 years that we've been doing this. And so, long story short, go there, theselfrecordingband.com, and apply for a spot in the Self-Recording Syndicate. I would love to talk to you and see if it's a great fit for you as well. Now, today's episode is a different one. We haven't done this one in a while, not ever, I think. Not in a while, but ever. So what we're doing this time is that I am sharing an interview where I have been interviewed on a different podcast. So this is a first for the show that we're kind of posting, sharing an interview that I've done on someone else's podcast. And it's not just someone else, it's Brendan Dekora. Brendan Dekora is a Grammy-winning producer, mixing engineer, and also such a cool dude. I really enjoy talking to him. He has a podcast called Pro Audio Perspectives, and on there he interviews, as he calls it, experts from the audio industry. And I am very honored and blessed and happy that he considers me an expert as well and invited me to his show. And he has worked with Brendan Dekora is the real deal. He has a Grammy. He's worked with artists like the Foo Fighters, Trent Reznor, Steven Wilson, Nine Inch Nails, all kinds of major label projects and also indie stuff. And he definitely knows what he's talking about. He has this great show, and I was interviewed there, and we talked about pre-production, about how I work with artists that hire me to mix their songs, about how I guide them through the production process, the pre-production, so that they are actually ready to send me their files for mixing. We talked about my personal preferences in terms of music and my style, aesthetic approach to mixing, the background, how I got to even become a mixer and producer and all of that. So that was really fascinating for me as well, and interesting, and as I said, an honor. And I think the stuff that we talked about is very, very relevant for you. We talked about all the things that I actually also teach in the syndicate, and about all the things that are so important to me, that like the song and the performance are more important than everything else, and how to prepare for the studio, how to avoid like common mistakes, the communication that needs to be spot on between artist and producer, and all the different hats you're wearing, the modern role of a mixer and engineer and producer and how it has changed, and all these things. I think it's very, very relevant, it could be hopefully very helpful and valuable for you. I believe it is. And that's why I want to share it on the show. And also because I want to make you aware of Brandon's podcast, because you might go over there and subscribe to his show as well and listen to that, because he got amazing people on there, amazing guests. I think you'd enjoy it, and I would love for you to show Brandon some love. Go there, subscribe to his show, leave him a rating and review, and keep listening to his show as well. So without further ado, here is me being interviewed on Brendan Dekora's podcast, The Pro Audio Perspectives. Enjoy.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Welcome to Pro Audio Perspectives. I'm Brendan Dekora, and on the show, we'll dive into the heart and soul of the music industry. I enjoy candid conversations with professionals from across the pro audio field. In each episode, we explore the emotional connections and the artistry behind the music, going beyond the technical aspects to uncover what truly inspires great performances. Thanks for joining me. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Benedict Hain. He's a coach, mentor, and mixing engineer with credits on Pulley, Swallows Rose, Blackjack, Searching for a Reply, and many more. Enjoy. First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure. Excited.
Awesome. I'd like to start, if you want to go over your backstory, kind of how you got to where you are, what led you into music and engineering in the first place, that kind of thing.
Sure, of course. So I've never done anything else in my life, first and foremost. So I'm one of those stubborn people who just, I wanted to do this and I made it work. Not recommended necessarily the way I've done it, but it worked out for me. So when I was still in school, I was in a band. I started that when I was like 14, 15 years old, something like that, a punk rock band. And we ended up, we played a lot of shows and we toured all over Europe and got a small record deal and everything while I was still in school, at the end of school, basically. And so I did that for a while, and we didn't have any money to make, to go to studios. And also we weren't really good enough at the time.
Right.
Kind of. So that was before we got the first record deal though. But like, out of necessity and out of interest, I started to record our own demos. It's, I think, a pretty typical story. And I did that in our jam space. And then some other local bands. I was pretty much the only guy around here who did that. And then some friends' bands asked me to record them and do their demos. And I had no idea what I was doing at the time, of course, but I just did it for free. And then somebody gave me like $50 or something. So I did that as a hobby, as a fun thing, sort of. But then, then I made, I think, I kept doing that for a while, and then one of our self-produced records, like I said, we got a little record deal with a hardcore punk rock label, sort of, that picked that up and made a vinyl record, and then we went on tour. And then some other bands that I've worked with had similar things happen. And so a few years into this, doing it on the side, I was kind of, I accidentally built my kind of studio thing already without realizing, but it worked kind of for the bands that I was working with. And looking back, stuff still doesn't sound really good, but it was good enough for what we were trying to do. And then after school, I was too afraid at first to really do this, or I didn't realize I could do this full time, like the audio engineering, production side of things. But it was still all I did every day, and there was nothing else I wanted to do. But I tried going to university and getting a real job and a real education. But I never really went there. I spent all my time in the studio in the jam space, and I just stayed enrolled because in Germany, like, we have healthcare insurance for everybody, basically. But if you're a student, this is way cheaper than compared to when you're self-employed. So I basically stayed enrolled just because of that. But I never really took it seriously. So I dropped out of university or college after 3 semesters the first time. Then I gave it another shot at a different thing, and I again dropped out just because all I ever done was audio. Yeah. And then the second time I thought, well, I guess I should just do this because it will work. It already kind of works. I built it on the side, and then I didn't try another time, and I went full-time audio. And I built this, I rented this place that I'm still in here. I rented this 11 years ago and built it into a studio thing. And that was my first kind of commercial space that I'm still in to this day. And and then from one day to the other, I happened to become a producer, a mixer. And then I did that for 6-7 years, producing, mixing full time. And then I started getting more and more mixing requests. And I realized that was really the part of the process that also interests me the most and that I'm really good at. So I started specializing in mixing only, and I didn't do any production work. That was pre-COVID, by the way, 1 year earlier or so. And I didn't know that this was a very smart decision at the time because,
timing.
Exactly. Of course, many of my peers were obviously struggling when the pandemic hit. And since I was mixing then only remotely for people, it was not a big problem for me, luckily. And so mixing work exploded even more when that happened. And then, and for the past couple of years, I've been mixing full time. And that's kind of the studio story. And then the whole education thing that I'm doing now happened next, after that, basically. Yeah.
Right. And did you have any mentors? Did you go to school at all for it? How did you learn it?
Yeah. So I believe in mentoring, definitely. That's why I offer it as well. And I also think that learning as much, working on as many real world projects as possible, I think is a good way to learn versus just studying the theory. And I'm not bashing audio schools at all or anything. There's a lot of schools out there who teach great stuff. But for me, what really made a difference, I never went to school for that. What really made a difference for me was one of those earliest records that I've made that were kind of sounding okay already and that helped the bands get signed and it shows and stuff. One of those records that I made, I remember it was a band called Heavy Ride from Germany, and they worked with a mixing engineer, and my job was to produce it and to track it. And that was the first time ever that I collaborated with a professional on a project. And at first I was I was kind of against it because I had stupid ego probably, and I also saw what that guy charged, and I was like, why are you spending so much money on mixing? I could mix this, and they were like, no, we wanted to work with this guy. And I'm so glad that they did, because that person, an amazing mixing engineer, helped me a lot to get my source tracks, my recordings, and the production to a different level. He helped me prepare that so he could do a great job mixing. And that was kind of my first mentoring experience and collaboration experience. And that was the first time I realized how high the bar actually is and what it takes to do all of that. And then I got the mixes back, and I was blown away, and it was awesome, and it really helped the band also. And I was like, okay, I guess I got a lot to learn, and I need to work more with other professionals, and I have to stop doing it in a vacuum on my own. And that's where the value of mentoring and collaboration really made sense to me. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm not in the music city at all. I'm in the Bavarian Forest National Park in Germany. There's no city around. It's beautiful scenery, but all I had was DVDs, magazines, and the early YouTube, when it came up. But that wasn't even really a thing. And so having that experience really made a big difference. And from that moment on, I was actively looking for other people to collaborate with. I hired mastering engineers to master my mixes, mainly because I wanted to get their feedback on my mixes, not just the masters and all of that. So I did whatever I can to put me in the same room with people who knew more than I did and learn from those. So definitely mentoring, not all self-taught, definitely believe in that, but no formal training. Yeah.
Right. Nice. Awesome. I mean, one thing I like to talk a lot about on the podcast is kind of how to get great results from artists in the studio and how to inspire artists in the studio. And, well, actually, I wanted to ask, are you doing, like you said, you've done production stuff, you've done mixing, you've done engineering. Is there any one thing you focused on extensively, or just so I can tailor the questions?
When I did full production, you mean? Like if I focused on any of those aspects of the process?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, you already mentioned that you spent a long time just mixing exclusively, but you did full production as well too.
Yeah.
So when you're doing production work, is there like, how do you make sure the artist is ready for the studio? What's your approach to pre-production?
Great question. Yeah, pre-production is super important, and that's also something that I learned. Not too, like early on, I didn't really know that was a thing. I thought you write songs and then you hit record and you record them, right? And that's what many people still think that I work with. Like they're kind of surprised by what you can actually do to prepare properly and what pre-production actually is. I really think that's super important. And when I worked with, and even now, I consider myself, I'm a mixing engineer, but I consider myself kind of as a remote producer / mixing engineer,
right? Because
I do exactly what that other engineer that did with me is like, I help people get way better results before they even send me their stuff to mix. So all I care about is the end result, and whatever I can do to help them, I will do. And so even now I do a lot of pre-pro and production work remotely with the artists that I'm mixing for. And when I was still doing full production, it was very common for me to, if they're anywhere close, I would drive to their jam spaces and spend time there with them and listening to them as a band and what they sound like, what the vibe is, doing pre-pro with them, capturing a quick raw sort of recording in their jam space and then refining that and making sure they're really prepared for the studio. I did a lot of that actually. And that is, to me, really, really important and valuable for those bands as well. And then there's this whole getting to know the band as well. I always had a better time at the studio when I spent some time with the people before and we communicated well and had at least a meeting or so, ideally pre-production together, because then when they were at the studio, I could better communicate with them. I knew kind of how, everybody's a little different. There's a lot of psychology when you're tracking and I just want to get the best takes out of them. And getting them to know in advance really helped with that. I also got the internal dynamics of the bands a little bit. I knew who was kind of the producer, and maybe there's a shy person in the band but has great ideas but never really, says them or whatever. And I tried to be, I tried to manage all of that a little bit and help them get the best results that way. Nice. And then at the studio, I tried to focus on really tracking and capturing that moment more than anything because all the prep work has been done. And part of that is also that a lot of the projects that I've done previously where I didn't take that as seriously, we ran into the same kind of problems all the time where you would try, you would start with the drums and everything sounds great. And maybe we had guitar scratch tracks or whatever. And then we would maybe track a rhythm guitar. And then when we did the bass or the other way around, at some point, there was always the situation where someone was like, did we always play like that? I thought we would come in on the one, but you are a little early, or like, the strumming pattern, I always play like this. Why is it like that? And then it was already recorded. And so either one person had to change their part or we had to re-record the other thing because they didn't realize in the jam space and in the studio, it was the first time they actually realized what the other people were playing.
Correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, I tried to do that in advance and be like, are you aware that the kick drum is here, but you're playing that chord here? And is that intentional? That kind of thing.
Right. So then what is, if you want to get into detail about pre-production, what do you do exactly to help people kind of figure out if their songs are ready?
Yeah, so first of all, I love to listen to whatever demos or rough mixes they have and get a feel for the vibe and the song. I try to talk to them a lot about, when someone requests a quote from me, for example, for mixing, then it's not just that I send out a quick email and like, that's what it costs. Do you want to do it? I will try to jump on a call with them and discuss it with them because I want to know what they're trying to do. Maybe they they like certain other recordings or records, and maybe they referencing certain things. Maybe they have a certain aesthetic in mind, and I try to really understand their vision more than anything. And then I listen to their rough mixes and their demos that they have, or I make them record demos if they don't have any.
Right.
And then I will, if they're open to it, not the same for every artist, but if they're open to it, I'm going to give feedback on arrangements or their playing technique or both, and trying to be careful there because you don't want to tell them their songs suck or the way they play suck. Of course.
Exactly.
It's kind of kind of be diplomatic there and careful. But at the end of the day, it's my job to give them the best possible end result. And if I feel like I'm doing them a disservice if I didn't point out these things, I always ask for permission, of course, and whether or not they're open to feedback. But if they are, I think it's a great thing to do that. And then it might be simple things like, hey, that chorus is great, but maybe we can create a more of a lift here by adding a few harmonies or doubles, or maybe what about this one guitar track? Could we double that and instead move the lead to the middle, or something like that? Or it could be performance things, or it could be like, hey, instead of doing up and down strokes here, maybe try just downstrokes because it could be tighter, and it could be, whatever it is. Like I'm listening to those things and giving them feedback. And sometimes bands don't want that. Sometimes they're like, nope, we do it exactly the way we think we want to do it, and your job is just to mix it. And then I might make the decision to say, well, I don't. Sometimes I mix it if it's great, but honestly, if it's not great, I might not even do it because I know that they're not going to be happy. So that also happens sometimes. So I'm all about the end result, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nice. And that's kind of ties into my next question a little bit is, what's your strategy for balancing the artistic vision with the practical aspects of production?
Great question. So the song and the vision and the vibe and the statics and all of that matters more to me than the technical details or even the sonics at the end of the day. So to me, it's like I would much rather make an exciting, unique record that the band is stoked about than trying to make a perfect record, or like that makes any sense. I'm all for modern, polished, big records, but what's more important to me is that it is exactly what the band wanted. And balancing that out is sometimes difficult, because sometimes I know I need to do a certain thing that would really help the band get what they want. But if I told them that I need to do this, they would probably not want this because they don't fully understand, and I don't blame them. They don't understand the process. So sometimes I need to just do it and show them the A/B maybe, and then the result will speak for itself. It's a little difficult. There's certain things that need to be done without, and the band doesn't necessarily know that they want this. And then there's certain things that I don't do if the band tells me not to do it. It's this balance. At the end of the day, it's about the vision that they have and the aesthetic that they want, and about the translation, also the communication, because sometimes they say they don't want a certain thing or they want a certain thing, but they mean something different. Or sometimes they say we want raw, organic sounding drums. So, and they think the way to do that is don't use drum samples or whatever. And then because they've heard maybe bad examples of that, it sounds unnatural or something like that.
Exactly.
And then they sent me references when I ask for references or things they like, and it's clearly all samples. And and then I'm like, oh, okay, maybe their definition of raw and authentic is a different thing than what I have in mind, or maybe they think it's the drum samples, but it's something else, So, or editing, same thing. Some people say like, we don't want any editing, because they think, or they heard someone talk about how it ruins, the feel or whatever. And it's not their fault.
But then they send references that are completely to the grid and everything else. Yep.
Exactly. So you kind of got to figure out what it is that they actually want versus what they say. And again, I'm not blaming people. Like it's my job to know that I'm the professional. They're not. So it's totally fine. It's just a matter of communicating and figuring that out. And then sometimes you just got to do it and show them, because if you explain it, then they might resist, although it might be the best thing for the record and for them. So.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And how do you build a successful and collaborative relationship with artists?
Again, I think over communicating, or like being just a normal person that you can access and ask questions, and being like, a collaborator more than anything is important, I think. I've also realized, and I've made that mistake in the past, that when so people love updates on their project. They love when you are when they feel like you're taking care of the record and you're taking care of them, and you are a good collaborator and communicator and all of that. But they don't necessarily want to know about the systems that you have in place and all the things that we do to make our life easier and more efficient. And so what I'm trying to say is sometimes from the business perspective or from our perspective, we do things that make the process better for us and more convenient for us, and allows us to take on more work without dropping balls and all of that. But I've made the mistake that I've gone too far in that direction when I was communicating with artists. I thought I would make everyone's life easier, but then they were overwhelmed with like checklists I sent them and an artist portal that we built. And I tried to over communicate and build a great relationship and make a smooth process for everyone. But for some artists, it's just overwhelming and too much. And they'd rather have just enough information to get through the project, and they want some updates, but they don't want to be overwhelmed by all the things that I require them to do in order to be able to work with me, basically. And so now I found a good balance, I think, between, on my end, staying on top of things and having good systems, but from the artist perspective, making it as frictionless as possible and as personal as possible, because they also don't want to, I think a big part of the relationship thing is they don't want to feel like they are in a mixing factory where everything's streamlined and there's processes and all of that. They want personal attention, and it's about their art, and they want to talk to you about their record. And as soon as they feel like, okay, this is a business that's doing a lot of like work like ours, and they are afraid they're going to get a cookie cutter service or whatever. And even though that's not the case, sometimes it might look like that. And so I think being as normal as you can, like a normal person, communicating well, being a good collaborator, being a good partner, and still having good systems on your end so that you're not drop balls. I think that's the balance there.
Right. Absolutely. What's your perspective on the evolving role of producers in the music industry?
That's a good one too. So I think we both know that like the word producer maybe means a different thing now than it meant a while ago, where like a producer can be everything. To a lot of people, the producer is the engineer, the mixer, the mastering engineer, and the producer, and all of that in one person. So I think that changed a little bit. So I'm pretty young still, so I'm used to that. But still, when I think that it's, at least in the type of work that I do with the bands that I work, it's not as common anymore to have a producer plus a recording engineer plus an assistant plus the drum tech and then the mixing engineer and all the staff of people, where the producer kind of had the big picture and put the team together and all of that. That doesn't happen as much anymore, at least in with the projects that I work on. So I think part of the evolving part of that is that a producer or mixer or whoever is more of you kind of have to, you can still build teams, of course, and outsource certain stuff or get specialists for certain things that can do things better than you are. But I think artists expect more than anything the result, and they expect you to do whatever is required to get to that point. So I think a producer nowadays needs to know a little bit about writing and arranging, but also engineering and mixing and all of that kind of. And sometimes it's that the bands or the artists are the producers and you are the engineer or the mixer, and then it's their job sort of. But even then you sometimes need to guide them. So I think you need to have a diversified sort of skill set more than anything these days. And you have to deliver like an all-in-one sort of solution for them. And that might mean that you still collaborate with others and bring in other people. But it's less specialized. I think it's not as, at least to me, it's not as common that the bands pick a producer and then a different engineer and a different mixer and all of that. They kind of come to me and say, this is what we have, this is what we want, can you do that? And so I think that's part of it. And also the whole remote thing maybe is also probably different. I don't know if you agree. I don't
I'm actually curious how, like, what are some of the steps you take when you're producing remotely?
So like I said, it all starts with the demos and the songs. I care most about the songs more than anything. And then once we got a good song and good arrangements, then I talk to them about like, okay, what's the vibe that will, and what's the but basically I'm talking about the sonic vision as the next step, which means is the room that you have can we use that? Is that actually a good idea to track in your jam space? Should you maybe go to a different room for the drums, for example, or should we not worry about that at all and be like, okay, let's program the drums? Or maybe you can track overheads and shells, keep it really dry, and then I might trigger drum like room samples or whatever. So I talk about that and help them navigate whatever situation they're in and make it usable or try something else. Then when it comes to guitar production, I might say, hey, can you please send me just a quick example of like your DI tracks or whatever you record, just so I can be sure that the tuning and the setup is right, because some people have a hard time hearing those details. I'm very sensitive to that, and they might think it's perfect, and then I get all the guitars and everything's slightly out of tune, and there's only so much you can do.
Exactly.
And so I'd love to hear that. I'll make sure the tuning is right, and then I help them figure out, how to use like which strings to pick, string gauges, and like even small things like, please, use new strings and put on new strings before you record, and maybe check them every once in a while and change them during the sessions, depending on how long you go. And same with drum skins and all of that. So that stuff I help them with. Can be playing technique. Like usually the way it works is that they send me examples, small snippets of stuff they recorded, and I have a quick listen and I tell them if I think it works or not. And it can be tricky sometimes because you don't always get the full picture, but I try to check as many boxes there as possible and help them with those things.
Right.
And it's not the same as being in the same room with a producer. That's not the same, but it is. It's way better than them trying to figure it out on their own in their jam space, and it avoids a lot of back and forth later in the mix.
Yeah.
So exactly. And I make that part of the mixing package basically that I have, where I try to provide that service, because I know that my life as a mixer will also be easier, and the result will be better.
Of course. Yeah. And what do you, oftentimes, when I'm mixing, I always request the DI tracks if they're available. But to be totally honest, I rarely actually use them, because guitars can be so personal and infinite in tone. So it's difficult for me, especially remotely, to try to, enhance their sound by actually doing reamping. How do you approach that aspect?
Yeah, I agree. Whenever possible, I try to use their tones. I request the DIs always. I always request both. Like one thing I absolutely don't want is if someone sends, like some people think it's a good idea to just send MIDI drums and DIs. And if that's the case, I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like this could go in all kinds of directions, right? I basically, that's producing, not mixing. And so, I request both. And if the guitars are not usable, then I at least have a kind of a reference and an idea of what they were trying to do, that plus the communication we had, and then I can reamp it. But whenever possible, I try to use their tones, because I totally think that, it's very personal. Sometimes, even if it's not perfect, they still had a good idea there, and I can make it work in the mix. Sometimes I blend in a second amp or whatever to add what is missing.
Right.
But whatever I can keep from their original recordings, I will try to keep, because that's the personality oftentimes of the record. And
exactly.
And also I think, and I don't know if you agree, but to me, with guitars, you can get away with a lot and call it like character or vibe or intentional. With drums, not so much. If the drums are crappy or the vocals if the drums are crappy or the vocals are crappy, the whole thing doesn't work. Like that's not so much. But if the drums and the vocals are great, then you can get away with a lot with guitars, and you can kind of, instead of trying to hide it, you can like fully feature it and be like, okay, that's intentional. That's the vibe now. And then you have these crazy mid-range guitars, or the other way around. And so, And oftentimes many bands also, the guitars are super important for them. So they really fall in love with the tones they have during recording. And if you reamp it and try to do something else, it's often, even if it's better, it's hard to convince them sometimes that it's actually better, because they fell in love with what they had. And so, I try to use that stuff, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. What's a common misconception about the music production process that you encounter?
Also, great question. There's a few. So, a misconception. Okay, so I think that maybe... Okay, that one's tricky. I think a lot of people think that the sound of the record happens in the mix, and they don't put any effort. Not all of them, but many of them don't put any effort into like coming up with cool sounds while they record, and they record everything as dry and flat and boring as possible, so that you can then do your magic in the mix. And you can do a lot in the mix, and yes, it's a big transformation. But I think that if many people would be better off focusing and being a little more bold in production and focusing more on like the source tones and the songs and the arrangements and delivering things that sound more finished already. Because yes, it's kind of risky, but at the same time, you can always record a DI in addition, or you can always, there's always like these safety nets that you can put in place. And I think making bold decisions and being creative and recording interesting, exciting sounds that sound like you and not like anybody else is very valuable. And I think more people should try and do that, even if they're not really experts, but they still might have great ideas. And so this misconception that you just basically track everything as flat and boring as possible, and then in the mix is where the sound happens. That's, I think, is a misconception. I think it's way better to dial in a great guitar tone, try a bunch of different mics, or maybe if you just have one mic, mess around with the position of the mic, try out different drum tunings, and record exciting tones that are maybe a little risky, but still it sounds more like you. And I think a lot of the production kind of work is being lost with DIY bands these days, where all of the production decisions are pushed back to the mixing phase almost.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah. And a lot of these things that I talk about here are these are all the projects when I work with like DIY bands. There's obviously also projects where you work with like great producers and engineers, and then you don't have these problems. And when you collaborate with other studios, but when you're collaborating with the artists themselves and they self-record, those are the typical challenges. So I think that's one misconception, that the sound happens in the mix. And every great engineer that you talk to, or every great producer, they will tell you that they focus a lot of that happens in the production and the recording and the rough mix of someone really great who does that. If you hit play and there's no processing on the mix, it still sounds pretty phenomenal often. So
right. Yeah, it always cracks me up when I see like, the advanced, tutorial videos with like super big shot mixers, and they're like, got all these tracks, and they play it before they're mixed, and it sounds incredible. It's like, well, if I got tracks like that, I would do incredible mixes too. Like, of course, it's like these are bands that spent months in the studio. It's like, okay, of course it's going to sound great.
Of course. And this is one big problem with online education, that a lot of people only see these tutorials that are using really well recorded tracks, and it doesn't necessarily translate to their DIY tracks. And there's a lot more repair work you have to do. Or the even better advice would be, instead of trying to fix that, the better advice would be produce better, like record better tracks to begin with. And that's a challenge. And also when we are promoting our coaching services or our courses or the podcast that we have and all of that, most people, honestly, in our audience need production and tracking advice, and maybe even arranging and writing, but they think they need mixing advice. Almost everybody comes to us being like, when I ask what's the thing you're struggling most with, almost everybody says mixing immediately. And then I listen to their songs and I'm like, mixing is not your main problem at the moment. Like, we need to fix these other things first. But they don't realize. And a lot of the online tutorials also and YouTube videos and all of that focus so much on mixing and not so much on what happens before that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually been going down a rabbit hole myself recently of like that exact thing, where I'm getting tracks to work on that, that need exactly that. They need better production and recording and everything else. And so I've actually been kind of doing the opposite of you, and that I've, mostly mixing now, but I'm thinking of doing more production now to kind of help people before they get to the mixing stage, because of that. So that's interesting.
Please do that. The world needs more good producers. Do that, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's tricky. It's like, I mean, and even when you work with them, like in the coaching or whatever, it's hard to convince people sometimes that they need to focus on the source tracks and their songs, because it's more interesting to them or easier to them to just open up their session with their already recorded tracks and then messing around with EQs and compressors instead of re-recording, right? That's less convenient, of course, but oftentimes the right thing to do.
Exactly. What's one trend in music production that you're currently excited about?
Oh, that I'm excited about. Okay, that's a cool one. That I'm excited about. So I'm excited about I don't know if that's new, but I've heard some really good artists that blend different genres and like kind of push genre boundaries.
Okay.
So I think that's exciting. So I know there's kind of the elitists and purists who are like, I don't want any electronic elements in my rock music and whatever.
Yeah.
I personally embrace that if it's done tastefully and if it serves the song.
Yeah.
So I think there's I think that's exciting that there are many artists who, incorporate, EDM elements or electronic elements in their heavy music or their rock music, or add some post-production effects that can be super exciting, or like these kinds of genre bending things I'm really into. Also, I don't know if you seen the same thing. What I'm also excited about is we kind of, at least in the rock and heavy music world that I'm in, I feel like we're past the point of these productions that all kind of sounded the same, where everybody used the same drum samples and the same guitar tones, and it was all kind of. I think things are getting more interesting again. I hear more natural, kind of organic sounding drums that are still punchy. I hear more crunchy, messed up tones and like less perfect things. And that is, I think, exciting as well, because things still sound big and massive, but not the super clean, thing where almost everybody just sounds so perfect and the same that it's not really interesting anymore. So I kind of think we're past that, and I really enjoy that, because that makes records also less dated to me. There's a certain, there was a certain period where you listened to a couple of metal bands and you were like, oh yeah, this is clearly the early 2000s or whatever, when metalcore was big and like everybody sounded like that. And now I feel like I'm hearing more records that are potentially timeless, which I love. So, yeah.
Right. No, exactly. It's almost like, there's elements of indie rock and other genres, like sonically, not even stylistically, that are being implemented. And that's very cool for sure.
Yeah, totally.
How do you maintain a balance between your artistic integrity and commercial success?
Great. You got good questions, man. So, I hope so. It's funny because I always thought I am a punk rock producer, and and punk rock and hardcore and like that kind of stuff. My background, that's always what I wanted to do. And I thought that's the records that I'm going to mix. And this is who I am as an artist and who I am as a mixer and all of that. Turns out that a different type of band came to me over and over again and really enjoyed working with me. And that was kind of more the radio rock, actually more polished stuff. But they wanted to do that with a little bit of an edge, and they want to, I don't know, that's kind of a genre that I never really wanted to do. And I felt kind of weird about it at the beginning, because my, 18-year-old punk rocker like doesn't like that kind of music. And kind of, but I'm not like that anymore. I now embrace it, and I now see that like there's more than just the music that I listened to when I was growing up. And so I took on these projects, and they were successful, and the bands came back to me and worked with me. But I still tried to do the things sonically that excite me, and then I love about these other records that I grew up listening to. So I tried to kind of blend those two. And so I'm still enjoying the same things that I've always enjoyed about records, but I sometimes implement them to other genres that's kind of the thing. So I hope I'm doing that. At the end of the day, I'm serving the artists and I give them what they want. But if I'm allowed to, that's, I think, the good way to put it. If I'm allowed to, I'm very happy to put my stamp on it and to make it something that I think sounds exciting. And then my kind of punk rock and raw, rough, kind of organic sort of roots definitely come through if I'm allowed to do that. If they want the super polished radio thing, I might do it as well, but I think I'll never sound like some of those people who always do that. There's always going to be some punk rock element to it when I mix it. I think.
Exactly. Awesome. Is there any current or recent projects that you can talk about?
Yes, there are a few actually. So right now, there's one that I'm. Okay, that one's cool and also frustrating for me because. Like I said, I'm always interested in like unique things, and I'm always interested in like gritty, vibey, kind of dirty things. That's just what I like. And so I'm on a constant quest for certain tones and like shooting out gear and figuring out, new ways to do things. I'm getting bored pretty quickly as well when I do the same things over and over again.
Right.
So long story short, I'm working on a record now for a band called Leicester from Germany. They are awesome. I've mixed a record for them before, and it did pretty well. And now they're coming to me for the next one. And the last one was pretty polished and pretty clean sounding. That one, we discussed that, and I think we both of us agreed that it should be a little dirtier. Now I'm mixing this at the moment, and I have a bunch of analog gear right in front of me that I not always use because I love being in the box and having the recalls and all of that. And I think I can get great results like that without compromise. On this record, however, I ended up using way more of my analog gear than I usually do, because usually I use it in a way that I kind of like reamping, where if I think something's lacking, I might run it through a piece of analog gear, print it, have it in the session, and then I can still do the recall. So that's what I often do. In this case, I pretty much every single thing here was running in real time. I used all the patch cables I have. I completely ran out of everything, basically. And I was like, shit, like this sounds amazing, and I love everything about it. But now I have all these analog gear patched in, and I actually don't want to do that because the recall's going to be a pain in the ass. And so,
to take pictures of your gear and all that.
But at the same time, I love it so much, and it was also a fast and fun way of working. And so, that's a record that I'm very excited about. I just sent out the mixes to the band yesterday, and they also got back to me already, and they were blown away. They love it, which is great. But now I'm like, okay, do I have to do this now again, like every single time? I want it because it's awesome and it worked really well, but also it's a pain. And I don't know. I do whatever is great for the project. So if I have to do that again, I'll do it. But it's kind of made me think, and I still, I'm not saying analog is better. I'm not saying digital is better. I will do whatever is great for the project.
Right.
But I would really want digital to be better because it's fast, But if the other stuff sounds better, I will use it. So that's one project I'm excited about. It's an indie rock thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then I got so many more singles and EPs than records lately. So there's a punk rock band from France that I'm just mixing right now. They're called Breaking Tag. Then there's an indie artist from the UK that I'm mixing a single now currently for. There's a punk rock band from Austria that I'm mixing a record for. All these are lined up. Mostly indie and punk rock kind of records.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same few questions each time. The first one is, who is your most influential teacher?
Most influential teacher? Who?
And it doesn't have to be someone you personally know. It could just be someone that's inspired you or something like that,
Interesting. So there's one person that I've only very briefly talked to and never really got like any personal sort of mentoring, but I just love his work, and I've studied everything he's done basically, and kind of learned a lot through that, just through reading interviews and studying and and that is Kurt Ballou. I don't know if you know him. He's God City.
Familiar,
God City Studios in Boston, I think, or close to Boston, is his studio. Salem, Massachusetts, I think it's And he is. I just love. He's in a band called Converge, a very heavy band, and I just love his productions. That's stuff that I grew up with, and to this day, every time there's something released that's done by him, I study it and listen to it, and that's something that I just love. So I've learned a lot from him without ever getting personal mentoring from him. And then there is one person, another one that I like to mention, just because I like the way he explains things so much. I'm not necessarily a fan of all of his productions, but I'm a big Andrew Sheps fan. Just because, first of all, he can do so many different genres really well. And then every time I hear him talk, and it was also amazing when I met him at NAMM this year, he's just such a nice guy. And the way he explains things and the way he talks, I just like listening to him. It all makes sense to me when he explains things. It's a nice, calm way of doing that. And I don't know, that's somebody I've learned a lot from online, and who's also a really nice guy if you meet him in person. So those two come to mind.
Awesome. The next question is, what is your favorite reference track if you have to go to a new studio, kind of learn the room? And I know that doesn't always apply to everyone. I find more and more engineers are working in the same spaces, their own place, that they don't use that anymore. So if that's the case, what do you put on to be inspired?
Yeah, so I still do that. So sometimes I get to other places, other studios. Still, I do the. I need to say, I said I do 100% mixing now. I do the occasional production project, like I did one in the U.S. just recently when I was at NAMM, and then I flew to Arkansas and did one there. Just because I feel like I have to keep my skills fresh, and if I'm teaching production, I need to do at least a couple of production projects to still do what I teach. I feel weird about being a teacher of something that I don't do myself. And then also it's enjoyable every once in a while. I just like that. So yeah, when I get to new studios, I don't know if many people do that, but I like to listen to my own stuff a lot because I know exactly what that sounds like. So I usually put on my own like Spotify playlists or like my own references that I have on my computer. So fairly recent stuff that are just top of mind and fresh, and then I immediately know what it sounds like, kind of. So that's what I like to do. And then I have I don't have the one reference track. What I like to do, and that might be a helpful thing for people listening, is like I like to have reference tracks that are at the extremes of what I think is good. So I might have a track, and this might be completely outside of the genre, but I have a reference kind of playlist that's very, very big. There's a lot of songs in there, but I have a track a playlist of songs that might even be outside of the genre, where there might be a song that has so much low end that it's like the absolute maximum that I could ever imagine having on a song. And I know if my song has more low end than that, I'm going too far. And then I might have songs on there that are super bright and almost harsh, but like still kind of okay. But I know if my song is brighter and harsher than that, I'm going too far. Yeah. So I kind of test the extremes. Nice. So I put on some of these songs and I try to listen to what those extremes sound like on those speakers. And so I get a feel for it. There's been a lot of like these 2000s era sort of pop punk records that are super bright and almost harsh. There's a couple of there's an Avril Lavigne record, for example, where there's some songs that are really like I wouldn't want to make them any brighter or harsher. And there's like some other, so that kind of stuff. And then there's a lot of hip hop tracks, of course, with like a massive low end. And I like to use those as extremes and then find out, what that sounds like. Also things like a song where I know, okay, the vocals are really loud, but still kind of sit okay in the mix. But if my vocals are louder than that, they're probably too much on top of it. So that's the thing I like to do.
Nice. That's awesome. Last question is, what would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
Action, like taking action and practicing, is more important than learning all the theory first, or like learning all about all the different mixing techniques that are out there, because it can be really overwhelming. I talk a lot to a lot of people who think they need to know everything about recording and mixing before they can do the first step. And I don't think that is true. I think it's actually the opposite. A lot of people are paralyzed by all the things they could do, and then they don't know even what to start with. And so I'd say maybe pick one educator that you trust, that you like their style of teaching, maybe someone who uses the same DAW as you or whatever, like someone you resonate with, and then follow their tutorials or whatever they have step by step. Maybe get a book, depending on your learning style, but pick one source of information that's trustworthy and good. And then once you learn about a new thing, before you learn about 10 other new things, maybe try that one thing first and see if it works, and then move on to the next thing, and do it one step at a time. And I think the more you do, the faster you'll learn and the better you get. And if you do that and keep the feedback loop short, also like sending your stuff out to people and get feedback quickly, helps you a lot. I think if there's two people, one person finishes 10 songs in the same time period, where the other person finishes one song in that same time period, the person who does 10 songs, they might not be perfect, but I bet that they are better at the end of that than the person who just worked on one song. Just because every single time you start a new project, you get better and you learn new things and you implement that. And so just do more work, keep the feedback loop short, and do it step by step, and don't try to learn everything before you take the first step. Same with plugins. Instead of trying to master all of your plugins or buy more plugins, maybe pick one EQ, one compressor, and one reverb and learn those really well. And then do the next one and learn that really well. So I think that is valuable because of the insane amount of information and tools that is out there these days.
Of course. Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. Thank you. It was exciting and an honor to be on your show.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me, man.
Thanks for joining in today on Pro Audio Perspectives. Make sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next week.